when we find ourselves frozen in fear or frozen by fear, it's really important to ask ourselves to validate what is truly causing me to be afraid. Is there something to truly fear here? Because the inner critic really and truly will create a false sense of fear. We'll just buy into it and allow it to be something that we perceive as real without questioning it first. Hi, and welcome to the Heart Leader Podcast, where our heart and our minds align. I'm your host, Amber, and I am here with Austin as we continue to talk about silencing our inner critic. So if you haven't had time yet, now would be a wonderful chance to just click that subscribe button below to make sure that you don't miss a single episode as you gain these superpowers to get in there and fight against that inner critic. Today, we are going to talk about how that inner critic gets us frozen in fear, and the tools and the superpowers that we have in the starter kit that we've been navigating through to really go in and combat that. And Austin, part of what we really want to do is talk about how you can do that in everyday life, because it would be great if we all had 5 hours a day to just take time to do nothing but combat that inner critic, right? If we were vigilantes for our inner world, and that's all we needed to do was go in and go after that inner critic. But for most of us, between our personal lives and the families that we have and the jobs that we have and the other things that we need to do just to exist, we're lucky if we have 30 minutes a day to dedicate to that inner battle. So when we share these superpowers that we can amp up, it really needs to be focused on how you can do that in everyday life, how we can be powerful in our everyday life. So when we talk about things like frozen in fear, which is something a lot of us have experienced, how can we apply that to an everyday life kind of scenario? And I know we had one of these everyday life scenarios where we were like, well, why in the world would that be frozen by fear? So are you willing to talk about that moment where we were both like, how in the world? Why in the world? I don't even understand this.
Yeah. So a few years back, we went on a little vacation for your birthday to San Diego, and we had a really good time, just for reference. It was a ton of fun. And but one of the things we did is we checked out the San Diego Zoo, and it's amazing. It's a lot of fun to just explore. And but when we got to the giraffes, we saw something really interesting. We saw that the gates that were because a lot of these animals, of course, being a zoo, have fences to kind of keep them in and keep the people a little maybe safer and
keep them out.
Keep them out of so it's safe for the animals too, and it's just all the above. So the giraffes, the fence holding them back was like I could walk right over it, or like anyone that has decently long legs could pretty much walk over it, let alone the long legs of a giraffe, which very, very tall. And so we were confused. We were just standing there like, how are they still in the enclosure? What are they, what's going on? I mean, it can't be just that there's food there. Like what else? So we took a step back and we ended up talking to one of the park representatives, for lack of a better term right now. And they just said that giraffes are so afraid of stepping over something because, if they hurt their leg or they break their leg, I mean, that's really, especially being in the wild, I mean, they're done. And now, of course, if they got injured at a zoo, they would be well taken care of. but that innate fear is still there. And so they keep the fence really, really low because they don't have to make it taller than that, because the giraffes are afraid to walk over it. And so, yeah, that was kind of wild. We weren't expecting that type of answer, that much fear was that paralyzing for them to keep them in there.
Yeah. So here they are, completely capable of breaking out of what's holding them. It was literally no taller than our knees.
Yeah.
They could easily move about. And instead, they're so frozen by fear, frozen by that innate voice inside of them. Like, we think we're the only ones that have this. We're the only beings that have this inner critic or this inner holding keeping us held back. But that showed you and I that we are not. That there's even this inner dialogue or this inner feeling that will hold a giraffe back from its own freedom, its own ability. And so then we start to think, well, what's holding us captive? What could we just step over right now in our own lives that we're not, that we're so frozen by fear that we're not willing to step over something that's no taller than our knees?
It's a great question. I even think about, have you seen those videos where there's like an ant on a piece of paper, and the ant's kind of just walking around. Then they draw a circle around the ant, and then the ant continually gets to the end of the circle, turns around and goes to the other side, gets to the end, turns around, goes to the other side. And so there's absolutely zero barrier at that point, and there's nothing in the way, but it's that illusion of a barrier. And so, yeah, it is when we get to see it from the outside, it's it's obvious for us. But when we're in the situation, it may not seem like an illusion. And so that's where our conversation today hopefully provides a little bit of guidance and awareness, and can kind of help people have that courage and empowerment to step out of where they're at and step over, break that illusion and step over the fence that's holding them back.
And that's just it. That is the superpower, really, is finding ways to look at what is holding you back. What is the circle that your inner critic has drawn around you? And we'll talk about this later, but it's like this invisible fence that has been placed. It's your little circle or your knee-high fence, right? And your inner critic will constantly put those up. And you don't even realize it because you're so paralyzed by the fear that it's real, the illusion that it's real. And so we have to have an opportunity to see it from a different way.
Yeah.
And since we have the beautiful opportunity to be in service of other individuals as they're navigating their life journey, I had one who was willing to let me share their story in our book. Alex, who's an artist, non-binary, they are very, very dedicated to their art. And when they first started out, they were also very frozen by fear. And perfectionism played a huge part in that. They felt very, more than the whole non-binary, which at that time was not very accepted and also played a part in their fear. But more than that, it was the vulnerability of each piece. They put their soul into it. And so it is very challenging when you place part of your soul into your art to allow it to go out any less than perfect. And they were very concerned that others would find flaws in it, which then would mean that others were finding flaws in them. And that caused them to just freeze. And as much as Alex desired to put their artwork into galleries or to submit to shows, the fear of rejection of their pieces meant fear of rejection of them. Finding flaws in their pieces meant finding flaws in them as a person. And so they just stopped and they wouldn't go any further. And we had to find a way to break through that. And no matter which direction we went, Alex was like, I can't. So eventually we needed to find a way to navigate, to look at it from a different perspective. So one of the things I recommended was reading a book about a really famous novelist who simply wouldn't give up, wouldn't surrender for any, never give up, never surrender, would not surrender for anything. And it took him a very long time. I believe he was like in his 70s before he finally became a best-selling author. But he took every rejection, he took every no, and he learned from it. And he tailored and he honed his craft. And he realized, the whole book is about how he realized they weren't rejecting him. They were giving him pointers on how to become the best artist he could be through the writing. And when Alex read that story, they realized that the art is an extension of them. It is not who they are. And that gave them the strength to look at it from a different perspective. And that good art, being an extension of who they are, then becomes an extension of who sees that art. And so what someone realizes by seeing their piece suddenly provides that person an opportunity to see a reflection of themselves, not of Alex. But until Alex opened themselves up to that potential, they had been frozen by fear. And their inner critic held that space, kept reinforcing that circle, kept reinforcing that wall. And Alex couldn't do anything to get past it. And so we have to find whatever that entry point is to just break that circle, to break that wall enough that we can get through it. And that's your superpower. It's never giving up until you find where that little break is.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's a powerful story, and I appreciate for anonymity purposes of our clients, Alex's willingness to share their journey to support others, because that is a core aspect of them being that loving,
yes,
and that caring. And so it's one that it may not be the exact, but I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, in that feeling in some aspect of their lives. I know I felt that with golf. And that was a big part of me. Like anytime I stepped on the course, that score, whatever I shot, was like a representation of me and where I was. And if I would I was just talking to my dad the other weekend, and we were saying, man, like, do you remember when I used to spend 8-9 hours on a range for weeks and weeks and weeks? And I mean, just drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling. And then I'd go and play a tournament and shoot terrible score. And it was like, man, this is such a reflection. This is coming off like I don't know how to play golf, or like I don't practice, or I don't care. And it's exactly the opposite of what I feel. And so, but I was losing myself with every shot. It was as Alex and you were presenting about Alex, it was like, it wasn't an extension. It was like an actual gifting of my soul with every shot, that I felt like I was just getting either rejected or put down or shut down, or like every score that was not where I wanted to be was like getting a no. because ultimately my goal was to play in college golf or play professional golf after that. And so it was, when I didn't have a score that represented what I felt is representative of my skill level, then it was like I was getting a no. And so, yeah, it was tough. And it wasn't until that I really began to let go that I started to play really great, recognizing that it wasn't necessarily wasn't really a part of me, and that I could just pulling the best out of myself was actually had nothing to do with my identity. And I didn't have that awareness at that time. I would have called it something very, very different. But later, when I did get injured, I realized how tired I still was in many ways. But when I played my best golf, it was like golf was a byproduct of who I am, not actually who I am. And so I think that's so important when we think about our professions or our hobbies or our relationships, or most importantly, even our ideas. Like they're not who we are.
Yes. And again, talk about taking power back from that inner critic. When you think about superpowers, that's part of a superpower, is knowing your power.
Mm-hmm.
Your power isn't something outside of you.
Mm.
It isn't something that can change. Your power is you. And so the moment you stop making it about something that somebody else determines, and you understand your inner critic can't take away your power, the moment you realize it doesn't have your power, you are your power. Mm. And you can walk over any barrier that it puts in your way simply by being willing to look at it in your best superhero stance and say, I hear you, but no. And taking feedback from individuals who, when Alex reached the point that they did place their artwork at the first festivals, of course people are going to have feedback and viewpoints. And some of them are very supportive. Some of them are not that supportive. Everyone has a viewpoint. It is how you receive that and the actions you take from it that will determine how you move forward. And if the inner critic latches on to the ones that are not that supportive, and I know you navigated this with golf, everyone loves a winner and everyone loves to critique when you don't do well.
Yeah, or forgets a loser.
Yes.
That was a big one that went in my head.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm only good as long as I'm winning. Mm-hmm. And the inner critic will latch on to that very well. And then start to feed that negative brain bias, that negative thinking we have. But then when we can visualize that superhero stance squaring off with that inner critic and saying, I am not a single moment in my life. I am what I determine I am. And I am moving through this moment and getting to the next. It's a powerful thing. It is in a starter kit when you may not have the strength to do some of the more advanced. This is an opportunity to know that your power is greater than anything outside of you, and to start that first process.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing the shift that we can experience when we move from the outside to the in, to the inside to the out. And that's why I love what you've brought forward in these podcasts is although we view the inner critic as an external, it still is within us. And so it can't actually take away anything. That we're giving it away.
Yes.
And that means that it's in our direction, because oftentimes when it feels like something is being taken, it's like, oh, it's out of my control, or out of my, like, I can't, it's easy to become a victim of that. Right. But when we realize, as you're saying, that it's all from within us, well, first of all, it's hard to make that realization that, okay, yeah, I'm the one giving it away, which is painful to recognize. It's like, wow, why? Because you don't consciously desire to give away your power. That's not the first thing you think. Like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do today. I want to give away my power. Like, yeah,
Take
here
it.
you go.
It's all yours.
Yeah, like, no, that's not what we're waking up with. That, that isn't our goal. And so going from the unconscious giving to the conscious giving is difficult. And so I don't want to put any I don't want to have a lack of value around that process, because it's hard. There's depth. There's, it's a lot.
And we're still doing it,
yeah,
like years and years
later.
and years into
Probably
it.
will continue in many ways, because it creeps into all parts of who you are. But when you do bring that from the unconsciousness into the consciousness of it, and then you can recognize, well, I'm the one giving it away. That means the only one that can pull it back is you as well. Then that's like empowerment with like a jetpack that's able to soar you through the roof. It really is. So it's equally as difficult as it is liberating in that sense.
Yes, exactly. And when we find ourselves frozen in fear or frozen by fear, it's really important to ask ourselves to like validate what is truly causing me to be afraid. Is there something to truly fear here? Because the inner critic really and truly will create a false sense of fear. And often, and we've done this, we'll just buy into it and allow it to be something that we perceive as real without questioning it first. And that's where the giraffe made such a huge impact on me. When I stood back and I observed, and I was like, oh my goodness, here is this being that's so majestic and so intelligent, actually. And they are at no point just looking to see if that fear is a valid fear. How often am I questioning my fears, seeking the validation of whether or not they are an actual based fear? Because there are some fears that have a basis, right? There are many that are brought forward by our inner critic to hold us in. And so challenge that fear. Ask for proof. Look around. Be your own investigator and find out, do I need to fear this? Is there something I can do about this so that you can break free?
I love that. Yeah, I know one of the fears that I really struggled with was like, well, first off, my goal was I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be number one golfer in the world. Like that's, otherwise I was kind of, what's the point, right? It's like, that's what I wanted to get to. I just thinking of Friends. I want to be the number one cage fighter.
Need to be the
ultimate cage fighting champion. So anyone who's a Friends fan, you'll get that. But so yeah, I wanted to be the number one golfer, and I didn't realize how much fear I had centered around it. It was like, at first it was the idea that there was a fear of failure, that I wouldn't be that. But I think it was even more, because that's even to some degree a surface level version of the fear, because the realization that I wouldn't be, although fearful, it was like it was crushing about what everyone else would think because I'm not. So it wasn't even about me or whether I reached it or not. It was like, here I am spending all this time, all my energy. I've got my parents, my friends, all these organizations, everyone believing in me. I'm afraid that I'm going to let them down by not reaching what we all feel is a potential, and I'm sure a lot of golfers or athletes, anyone who's really putting their time and energy and effort into it, I mean, they're not like, I want to be 13th. It's like, like, or
that's an achievable
20,
goal.
27th. Like, that's not like you want to, there is a benefit in competition, and it's a way to understand your skill level, and that's a whole other conversation. But so I wasn't because I wanted to like just crush everyone, or it wasn't egoic. It was like, I deeply desired to see that. Like, I visualized it. I watched myself get all different trophies and winning throughout the year, and it was like I seeing myself in that, giving the acceptance speeches and the whole thing. It was like visceral. I felt it. And the only thing that was bigger was the crushing feeling that everyone around me realized I couldn't reach that goal. And until I allowed myself to really see that was the fear, I like the moment I made that recognition, then I finally felt liberated, because I was like, okay, well, the people around me love me. That's something I'm projecting on them. They just want to see me happy, and if I reach that goal, then they're going to be there to support, and if I don't, they're going to be there to support. And that's a beautiful thing. How lucky am I? How grateful am I that the people around me, whether I reach it or not, are going to be there for me? That's where I need to put my energy. That's where I need to put my focus. Not on failure. Because then that's, to me, wasn't respectful and loving to those people who were being respectful and loving to me. That was a hard one to wrap around. I had to really, really let go and really release this tie of any tie to my ego in that sense, and really just be in the gratitude. And that's such an incredible way to get over what the feeling of being frozen by fear. Gratitude.
I know. We talk about that tool so much, but it's very powerful. Like gratitude and breath. Yeah. Man, if you're in a position where you're not sure which tool, which superpower to pull out of an arsenal, gratitude and breath can break things down and stop cycles in a heartbeat. They really can.
Yeah. Just one breath.
Just one breath. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
It is impressive how, when you really start to investigate the whats, the whys, the hows, just asking yourself those in-depth questions, and even looking for circumstantial evidence, right? Looking to see, do I have any situations where this is proven to be true or not true? And observationally understanding, then you start to remove the power that critic would have, because the critic's only going to feed you one side of the story. And it's going to be the one that plays into its best interest, right? Let's point out every time you failed, or there's a perception of failure, especially if it were golf, right? Let's point out every time you missed a shot. Let's point out every tournament you didn't win in. So let's build up that fear that you'll never succeed. But then what about every hole in one? because you actually have a photo where you had an immaculate hole-in-one. You've had a few of those. What about every time you won a tournament? Because I've seen a lot of trophies. What about every time you advanced in competitions? Those get lost. What about every article that was written about your abilities? Those get lost because the inner critic is spinning that web of lies. And some of it has truth, because it is true that you had some bad shots. It is true that you didn't win every tournament, but then that gets woven into lies that you'll always lose, that you'll never be good enough. And it's amazing how that suddenly gets power of its own and starts to suck your power away because you're giving it your focus and your attention. And that's what happens during the course of a day. When we start to say, okay, I'm getting frozen by fear. Okay, if my job is golf right now, then throughout the course of my day, that's sucking my fear. And next thing you know, you've got the yips. I can't do it. I just can't do it. And so what do? We begin to reset that and counter it with the facts.
Truth.
Bam.
Yeah. It's this is one of those practices that is definitely easier said than done.
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure that's said. and but it's worth it. It really is. Being in direction of your own power is such an incredible feeling, because when it's not from ego, it's from wholeness. That differentiation is everything. Because when you can bring all that you are from the space of being whole, like, to me, that's what it meant to be holy. If we're going to dive into any faith or spirituality or anything like that, it wasn't like it's that they're holy themselves, like WH, holy. And I think that's such a beautiful representation, because when we look at all these individuals throughout history who we would maybe deem as holy individuals, we looked at them with reverence, not necessarily I would feel not only because of actions, but because the action stemmed from a place of wholeness, of authenticity, of truth, of faith. And that faith was in themselves and in love, in knowing that through that action, if they breathed all that they are into that action, that it would make an impact. That's special. And that's something we all have access to.
Yes. Talk about the light within, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you consistently say the light in me sees the light in you. Well, to see it and embrace it, it is knowing your authentic self. And pulling your power back is to know your authentic self. And that is truly a heroic act. So, any other bits of wisdom to share on breaking free from being frozen by fear?
Something that did help was and remains visualization. That's kind of back to us being a reality generator. Even though I spent a lot of time visualizing me being the best golfer, for example, and that isn't something I've experienced in this lifetime. There are so many things I have visualized that have come forward. And so it's easy for the inner critic to pop in and be like, well, you had all this, you had this visualization, it didn't come through, like, something's wrong with you. And so don't get into that trap. Keep visualizing. Oftentimes we experience what we're meant to, and sometimes the feeling I had, for example, when holding those trophies and feeling that through, I have in different ways now. And so because golf was my sole focus then, that may have been the only visualization technique and practice that I knew how to make it occur. And so it's important to be more in awareness of where you're at, knowing that when you have a visualization, exactly the look and feel of it is great, but it may not, what actually occurs may be completely different. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you're bad or that you're never going to make it. So I'd just say, when you are visualizing, focus on how you feel in the visualization. Focus on the beingness that you are, like what is the energy you're holding? What is the vibration that you're holding? Because that's the one constant across all of the experiences that you have in your life. So whether I was holding a trophy or holding the love of my life, or, figuratively, like holding myself as I became who I am with true, authentic self-love, that's a constant vibration. And I can pull that into everything that I do. And so that's available for everyone. So when you are visualizing, really, really hone in on the feeling that you're receiving in that, and then emulate that through your actions. And you'll start to see things piece together more clearly. And then that visualization will get a lot stronger.
Yes. And I feel like that's such an important differentiator. Because as you study visualization techniques, there are some that are very connected to getting very specific with the visual of the visualization, which is beautiful. But it is the feel. How does it feel when you're in that moment? That is equally, if not more, important in that whole flow. Because that feel has such a strong impact in how, when the moment actually presents, you'll recognize the moment. Because you're right, sometimes things appear different in reality than they do in visualization. It's just the nature of our reality. But that feeling, like I can feel when you walk into a room, because I feel you so strongly. Whether I see you or I don't see you, I know that you're there. And I feel like most of us have that with someone, or maybe it's a pet. Maybe there are those that we have such a connection with that the feeling is just, the moment the presence is there, whether we visually see it or not, we can feel the connection. Mm-hmm. And so if you're visualizing something and you create that connection with the experience and the visualization, then the moment it presents itself in your actual experience, you'll be like, oh, this is it. And so thank you for bringing that forward and sharing it.
Of course. You're welcome.
See?
Yes. There we go.
For anyone who tuned into last week's podcast, that was one of the things we talked about. It's a growth area for us. Yes. You get to see it in real time. We're not kidding. We're on this journey too. So thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Heart Leader podcast and catching us in our own flow. Our hearts and our minds are aligning with yours as we navigate through silencing our inner critics, along with assisting as you're silencing yours. Each week, we will continue to navigate through this journey together. So take a moment, if you haven't already done so, and click that subscribe button below so you don't miss a single episode where we share these tools and resources that are eventually ending up in a book that will be released by the same name, Silence Your Inner Critic. And if you would like a copy of that book when it is released, you can get 20% off if you go over to silenceyourinnercritic.com and pre-register. We'll make sure that there's a link below wherever you're listening to this podcast. Until next time, I am your host, Amber, and I'm here with Austin, and we look forward to seeing you next week.